off with the definition of music therapy. I'm sure that half of the audience could rattle it off right now, and I'm going to read it. So music therapy is the clinical and evidence-based use of music interventions to accomplish individualized goals with a therapeutic relationship by a credentialed professional. So a clearer way to reorder that is you have a clinical problem and you add a therapeutic intervention that you apply with music by a board-certified music therapist, and that will result in an improvement of a goal. So there's your 2-minute music therapy lesson.
So we found a handful of terms used often in the literature describing music. So starting with music is.
So we're going to start with multisensory and complex. Music is complex, and all of you should know that because there's so many things happening at once. There's rhythm, and there's lyrics, and there's chord progressions, and you're processing it all at the same time. It's multisensory because it has the capabilities to satisfy all your senses. So for example, when you're playing the piano, you can feel the keys, you can see the piano, you can hear the sounds you're making, or when you're playing the clarinet, you can taste the reed and you can smell the wood, and all of these things are coming into your brain at one time.
Music is stimulating and enhancing. You might have one time heard that at some point that music is right hemisphere dominant. This isn't entirely the case. There are specific elements of music that might be activated by very specific regions of the brain, but music is cortically distributed, meaning it activates both our left and right hemispheres. Music is enhancing, and this is something that we can all probably relate to because we use it almost every day. It enhances our everyday functions, and we'll touch this more when we get to rehabilitation. Music is an alternative modality and template. Music becomes a tool in music therapy to achieve a basic task and therapeutic goal. As an alternative modality, music can access functions that are unavailable to a non-music stimulus, and it also provides alternative routes for information processing.
Music is also temporal, so something that is temporal fits into the structure of time. Your brain loves structure, so as music therapists, we're able to take music, fit it into a structure, and access the brain in a different way. So because we're talking so much about how music is affecting your brain, we thought we should give you a little brief layout of the areas of your brain and what they do. So think back to Psych 101. This is the frontal lobe. The area in blue is your executive functions, so your attention and memory. The area behind it is your motor cortex, so your ability to move. And we want to highlight this area in pink that says speech. That's your Broca's area, so you're able to use expressive language. The area right behind it is your parietal lobe, which is all your senses and your information processing. Right behind that is vision, your occipital lobe. And then on either side is your temporal lobe. That's your auditory processing and memory and emotions. We also want to highlight this little guy here. That's your Wernicke's area, which is receptive language. We're going to come back to that later. This area at the bottom is your cerebellum. That controls balance and coordination, and it stores your learned movements. And the area that connects your brain to your spinal cord is your brain stem, which is your respiration and heart rate.
So like we just said, music stimulates numerous areas in your brain, the left and the right hemisphere, as well as subcortical regions. You just looked at the cerebral cortex, so the subcortex lies underneath that. Music also stimulates your cerebellum and your brainstem, so the entire brain. This is an image that we found that demonstrates the areas that respond to specific elements of music. So you can see that there's a wide variety of activation. Starting with green, perceiving the basic acoustic features of music. So all of the green dots are labeled in what is known as our auditory pathway. Our auditory pathway has different levels that process these different acoustic features of music. So at different levels, frequency is processed, duration is processed, loudness is processed, localization of the signal and sound is processed. Blue is perceiving higher order musical features. So looking at the prefrontal cortex, which Sarah talked about as being responsible for our executive functions, it would make sense that the prefrontal cortex is processing these higher order musical features because it's for higher order thinking. The other areas in blue I'd like to highlight are your inferior frontal gyrus and your superior temporal gyrus. This is what Sarah just referred to as Broca's and Wernicke's area, as well as your premotor cortex. For the sake of this presentation, obviously we can relate harmony and intervals to speech and language. But rhythm is what we will talk about more with rhythm is it is used to optimize vocalization as well as movement within these areas.
Yes.
Oh no, we have more to say.
So the areas in orange are your ability to focus and keep track of music in time. The area I want to point out is the frontal cortex. So like we said, attention and executive functions. So this is your ability to pay attention to the music as it moves. So you know what happened 6 measures ago, you know what's happening as you're hearing it now. We're not listening to music, but when you're listening to music, and you can probably predict what's going to happen next. But the thing to keep in mind is you're not storing these memories, you're just kind of processing them as the music moves. The purple areas is your recognizing music and recalling memories, which we call episodic memories. The areas responsible for that are the angular gyrus, which is over here, and the precuneus. They're responsible for memory retrieval in association with music. So, oh, this is the song that I danced to at my wedding, or something like that. The areas in gray are your motor functions. So I can play the music, I can sing, I can move to it. So something very important to most of you. The areas most important for that are the motor cortex, which is the actual execution of your movements, and the premotor cortex, which is the planning and orientation of your body before the movement happens. So when you're playing the piano, the motor cortex is making your fingers actually move, but the premotor cortex says, okay, my fingers are here, and they need to move here. And these areas of the brain kind of interact with each other as you move. And the cerebellum is involved because it's balance and coordination. So I can stand up and play the violin and not fall over.
So lastly with our red, music evokes emotions and experiencing pleasure and reward. The red dots are found around our limbic system and our reward system. Our limbic system is primarily responsible for emotions and memory. So if you hear a song that is very specific to you in some way, or a song that you haven't heard in a really long time, and you experience a strong emotion to it, it's very likely that these regions are being activated. The reward regions surrounding the limbic system are the ventral tegmental area, as well as the nucleus accumbens, but we will touch on those more briefly soon. All right, so your brain is a part of your central nervous system, as well as your spinal cord. There are billions of these neurons within your brain, and these are specialized cells that receive, process, and transmit information to and from each other. Starting at the tip of our neuron, these little branch-like looking things are dendrites. They have little receptors at the end that are responsible for picking up signals in the form of chemicals called neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitter, with a strong enough signal, is released through what is known as the axon, and then into the axon terminal and released at the synapse. The synapse is the point of communication between two neurons. So this process happens again and again to the next neuron and the next neuron because they're just constantly communicating. All right, so thinking back to our green dots, our auditory cortex, our auditory pathway, which leads to our auditory cortex. The first thing in this image is the cochlea, which is found in our inner ear. The auditory signal goes up through a set of nuclei in our brainstem, and then it reaches the thalamus. The thalamus is a relay station for all of our sensory information. So when a signal or a sensory information of some sort reaches here, it prepares for a type of motor response, such as vocalization. Then that signal finally reaches our primary auditory cortex, where it's integrated, and if necessary, a voluntary response occurs.
So this is a video called Music in the Mind. It is about Renee Fleming, who is a famous opera singer who volunteered to be a part of a study with the University of Utah and the Kennedy Center to research how music affects the brain. So we're going to learn about Renee Fleming real quick.
I noticed research coming out about the fact that music has been discovered to be in a lot of parts of the brain, and therefore it engages so much of us.
It's an exciting time in neuroscience where we're beginning to understand how the brain interacts with the environment, and music is a really important part of the environment. And we're starting to learn ways in which music can influence all kinds of other aspects of one's brain function, and especially how we can use that information to use music therapeutically in an even more powerful way. This initiative aims to bring together communities that haven't necessarily gotten to know each other that well yet. The neuroscientists and the actual composers, performers, musicians, who will have the full grasp of the power of music and the variety of different styles.
Renee, thank you so much for coming in to do this experiment with us today. Could I give you a tour of some of the parts of the brain we'd like to see activity in? So this is one place we'll look for activity in your scan. It's the part of the brain that we call the motor cortex. It controls everything in your body. When you're singing, you're also speaking. And so we're going to look for activity in some of the parts of your brain that are important for forming speech. This one here is called Broca's area, and there's another one farther back called Wernicke's area. If you have injuries in either one of these parts of the brain, you can't form normal speech. So this is the auditory cortex. There's a spot near the middle where the information sort of starts, and then as you move outward, it's processing the information more and more. I think we're ready to get you set up in the scanner. Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. We're going to start our first scan.
We're starting to learn ways in which music can influence all kinds of other aspects of one's brain function, and especially how we can use that information to use music therapeutically. What does the brain look like when somebody is speaking? Okay, there's certain parts that are lit up. What does it look like if they're performing music? Other parts lit up. You're using more of your brain. If we could learn from that about how to fully empower people to use that creative talent that we're all born with, but oftentimes gets kind of pushed to the side by daily activities, I think that would be pretty amazing, and maybe this project can help with that.
Cool. Very cool. So just further detail really quick, Renee Fleming went into that scanner and they showed the areas of her brain that were activated when she sung versus when she spoke. And at the end, if you would like to be provided with further research on that, we can direct you in that.
I can tell you what actually happened. Cool. All right, neuroplasticity. Yay. Yes, that one. Thanks. So your brain is always learning and relearning. The neurons and neural structures that you have in your brain now are vastly different than what they were 10 years ago. So for example, if I were to put on a blindfold for like 2 days, my visual cortex, my occipital lobe that we saw earlier, would actually reorganize itself to respond to other stimuli like sound and touch. So it would still be contributing to the senses that I'm experiencing. And if I waited 2 days and took the blindfold off, in about a day or two, my visual cortex would be able to reassess and start responding to visual stimuli again. So it's that malleable, for lack of a better word. The brain changes in response to your behaviors and experiences. So what that means is the neural pathways that you're using on a regular basis are being strengthened, which is essentially, like working out your brain. What's important to note is that neuroplasticity can happen on many levels. So if we're looking at the smallest form, we're looking at the relationship between two neurons. Your brain can create new neural connections, as well as get rid of old ones, which is called synaptic pruning. It can happen on a larger scale with an entire network of neurons and create new neural pathways, or happen on an even larger scale with an entire brain region, which reassesses many pathways, just like the visual cortex if you were wearing a blindfold. Obviously, these types of changes take time and they don't happen quickly. With everything comes practice.
So like Sarah said, there are different levels, I guess, of neuroplasticity in our brain. Alternative pathways, though, are created when there is damage to the original pathway. This happens through the recruitment of shared and parallel networks, which we will show you quite soon. Yay! So thinking back at our picture of the two neurons, that space between known as the synapse, synaptic plasticity is the point where the synapse is either strengthened or weakened depending on the level of activity, so it basically follows a use it or lose it rule. The weakening and strengthening of the synapse is believed to underlie the process of learning and memory retention. So what exactly would strengthen your synaptic connection? High frequency signals, for example, such as a really strong experience. The other day I was telling Sarah that I can remember my College of Music audition like the back of my hand, just because it was such a strong experience for me. There was a lot of emotions involved. Secondly, repeated stimulation, so this consistent studying. So high frequency signals and repeated stimulation are both eligible for a phenomenon known as long-term potentiation, or LTP. So LTP is thought to be the cellular basis of memory formation. A super quick definition of LTP: high frequency stimulation happens between the two neurons, and they expel a specific receptor whose properties allow for specificity and association, and these are very important and necessary for learning.
I like him. So this is your reward system, which is essentially how you learn new things. Dopamine is the key and the power to your reward system. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's involved in motivation and learning. So when you learn a new task and perform it with success, dopamine is released in your brain, which gives you that pleasure and satisfaction feeling and leads to motivation to try the task again. So the most famous example of this is Pavlov's dogs. So think back to the 10th grade. Pavlov paired an auditory cue with a reward, which was food, which led to the dog salivating when the food was presented. This released dopamine in the brain when they received the food, which created the forming of dopaminergic neural connections, which goes back